Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a stack of sources here on something that honestly sounds a bit like science fiction. Chronic wasting disease,
Mm,
often called, zombie deer disease. So our mission today is really to cut through some of the noise and get to the core of what this is all about.
absolutely. It's a complex topic.
I've been really curious, especially with that nickname. So maybe just start us off. What exactly is CWD?
Right. So CWD, chronic wasting disease, it's a fatal neurodegenerative disease. It primarily hits cervids, so we're talking deer, elk, moose, reindeer.
Okay, fatal. And neurodegenerative, meaning it affects the brain.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, or maybe unusual, is the cause. It's not a virus, not bacteria. It's actually caused by a misfolded protein called a prion.
A protein, not a living thing.
Correct. And these prions, these abnormal proteins, they have this nasty ability to make normal proteins misfold, to they kind of corrupt them. And over time, these corrupted proteins build up in the brain. They cause damage, cell death, and eventually create these microscopic holes, making the brain tissue look, well, sponge-like. That's where the spongiform part of the scientific name comes from.
Spongiform, like holes in the brain. That is a chilling image.
It is. And if you think about the bigger picture, CWD belongs to a family of diseases called transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, or TSEs.
Ah, okay. I think I've heard of those. Like mad cow disease.
Precisely. Mad cow in cattle, scrapie in sheep. CWD is the cervid version, essentially. Same underlying mechanism, these rogue prions.
Got it. So where did this all start? Is it new?
Well, yes and no. It
Hmm.
was first noticed back in the 1960s, in Colorado, actually, in some captive mule deer at a research facility.
This is 60, so it's been around for a while.
The identification has, yes, but the spread, that's ramped up significantly, especially in recent decades. We're now seeing it confirmed, and I think the latest count is at least 32 U.S. states.
32.
Wow. In 4 Canadian provinces. Plus, there have been detections in South Korea, Norway, Finland, Sweden. So it's definitely an emerging issue globally.
Okay, so it's spreading. And I've
Right.
heard it spreads, well, efficiently. This is where it starts to get a bit unsettling for me. Talk about how it moves.
Yeah, it's considered one of the most contagious of these prion diseases. And transmission happens in a couple of key ways. There's direct contact.
Animal to animal.
Right. Through bodily fluids, saliva, urine, feces, blood, even antler velvet when it's shedding.
Okay.
But here's a really critical challenge. An infected animal can be shedding these prions for months, maybe even years, before it shows any signs of being sick.
Oh, wow. So it looks healthy, but it's actively spreading the disease.
Exactly. A silent spreader. And then there's the indirect route, which is, frankly, kind of terrifying.
How so?
These prions are incredibly tough. They're not like viruses or bacteria that die off easily. They can bind to soil particles. They can persist in water.
Persist for how long?
Potentially for years, maybe even decades. We're still figuring out the exact time frame,
Wait.
but it's long.
Decades. In the dirt.
In the dirt, on plants, in water sources. So an area can remain infectious long after the sick animal is gone. This environmental contamination is a huge problem.
I can see that. And I guess things that bring deer together make it worse, like feeding stations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Practices like baiting or supplemental feeding. Anything that concentrates animals in one spot dramatically increases the chances for both direct animal-to-animal spread and indirect spread from a contaminated environment.
It really is a silent, persistent threat then.
So, okay, for the animals themselves, you said they can be sick for a long time without showing it. What does it actually look like when the signs do appear?
Right, that long incubation period is key. It averages maybe 18 to 24 months. But it can be much longer, years even.
Okay.
During all that time, they seem fine but are shedding prions. Then, when the clinical signs finally emerge, they're progressive. It's a slow decline reflecting that brain damage. And what are those signs? What's the sort of classic zombie deer look, if there is one?
Well, the name comes from the most obvious sign, usually, the wasting. Just a drastic, progressive loss of body weight, even if there's plenty of food around. They just waste away.
Okay, hence the name. What else?
Neurological signs become more apparent. Things like stumbling, poor coordination, ataxia, we call it.
Yeah.
You might stand with their legs unusually wide apart. Tremors.
So, difficulty moving.
Yes. And difficulty swallowing, sometimes excessive drooling or salivation. You might see kind of blank facial expression, lowered head, drooping ears.
Behavioral changes too, I imagine.
Definitely. They can become listless, depressed, sort of isolated from the herd. Sometimes they develop repetitive walking patterns. And a really noticeable one is often a loss of fear of humans.
Ah, that's unsettling.
It is. They might also drink and urinate excessively. And often the thing that finally kills them isn't the CWD directly, but something like aspiration pneumonia because they lose the ability to swallow properly.
Wow. It sounds like a really difficult thing to watch. And you said hard to spot early. So how do scientists or wildlife managers actually confirm it if you can't just rely on seeing these signs?
Yeah, visual diagnosis is really unreliable, especially early on.
Yeah.
It can mimic other things like malnutrition. So definitive diagnosis. That can only happen after the animal is dead, post-mortem.
Okay. What do they look for?
The gold standard is testing specific tissues for the presence of those abnormal prions. Primarily the brainstem, a part called the obex, and lymphoid tissues, like the tonsils or lymph nodes in the head and neck area.
And how do they test those tissues?
There are a few lab techniques. Immunohistochemistry, or IHC, is very common. It essentially uses antibodies to stain the prions in a tissue sample, making them visible under a microscope.
Uh-huh.
ELISA tests and Western blots are also used. They detect the specific prion protein too.
Are there any tests for live animals at all?
There are, yes. You can do biopsies, usually from the rectum or the tonsils, because prions can show up in lymphoid tissue there before accumulating heavily in the brain. But they're less sensitive than the post-mortem brain tests, especially early in the disease. And they're just not very practical for large-scale testing of wild populations. It's invasive, requires capture.
Right. Logistically difficult.
Exactly. So for monitoring wild populations, the most effective approach we have right now is testing animals harvested by hunters, or those removed for disease control purposes.
So hunters play a pretty key role in surveillance then.
A crucial role. Those hunter-submitted samples are essential for tracking where the disease is, how prevalent it is, and whether it's spreading to new areas. These surveillance programs are absolutely vital.
Okay, so we know how to detect it mostly after death, but you said earlier there's no cure, right?
That's correct. Once an animal starts showing clinical signs, CWD is invariably fatal. There's no treatment, no vaccine currently available. It's a 100% mortality rate.
That's bleak. So if you can't cure it, what can be done? How do wildlife agencies even begin to manage this? It sounds incredibly challenging, especially with those prions lasting so long in the environment.
It is incredibly challenging. The focus has to be on prevention and control, trying to limit the spread. It's really all about managing the risk.
Okay, so what does that look like on the ground?
A lot of it comes down to biosecurity. Things like restricting the movement of live deer and elk, especially from areas where CWD is known to exist.
Makes sense. Stop it from hitching a ride.
Right. And carcass disposal regulations are important too, making sure infected materials aren't just left out on the landscape. Then there's the issue we touched on earlier, banning practices like baiting and artificial feeding that concentrate animals.
Because that just helps it spread faster.
Exactly. For farmed deer and elk, there are things like the USDA's CWD herd certification program, which involves surveillance and management practices to try and keep herds CWD free.
Okay. What about managing the wild populations?
That often involves trying to reduce deer density in affected areas. This might mean increased hunting quotas or targeted culling operations. The idea is fewer animals means less contact, slower spread.
That sounds controversial sometimes.
It can be, definitely. And then there's just basic environmental management, trying to decontaminate equipment, avoiding known contaminated sites if possible, though that's tough given the persistence.
And public awareness, I assume?
Hugely important. Educating hunters, landowners, the general public about what CWD is, how to recognize potentially sick animals, why certain regulations are in place, and the importance of reporting and testing.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the question that I think is on a lot of people's minds, the human question. Can people get this zombie deer disease?
Right. The zoonotic potential. That's definitely the elephant in the room.
So what's the verdict?
Well, the reassuring news first. To date, there have been no confirmed cases of CWD transmission to humans. 0.
Okay, that's good. But I sense a but coming.
But public health officials remain concerned about the potential. There's what we call a species barrier, which seems to be relatively strong between cervids and humans for this particular prion.
Meaning it's hard for it to make the jump.
Correct. However, some experimental studies have shown that CWD prions can infect other primates under laboratory conditions. For instance, squirrel monkeys contracted the disease after being fed infected meat. Macaques, too, which are genetically closer to humans.
Ah, so the barrier might not be absolute?
It suggests it might not be absolute. Prion diseases can sometimes adapt and change over time, too. So while there's no direct evidence of human infection now, the possibility can't be completely ruled out.
So what's the official advice then? for hunters, for people eating venison?
The strong recommendation from agencies like the CDC and public health authorities worldwide is simple. Do not consume meat from animals that look sick or test positive for CWD.
Get your deer tested if you're in an area where CWD exists.
Absolutely. Many states offer hunter testing programs. It's the prudent thing to do. Avoid handling the brain and spinal cord tissues if you're dressing an animal as well. Basic precautions.
Okay. And just quickly, you mentioned cervids, deer, elk. What about other animals, like, say, llamas or alpacas? Are they at risk?
That's a good question. They belong to the Camelidae family. So far, CWD hasn't been documented naturally occurring in camels, llamas, or alpacas. But it's something researchers keep an eye on, especially in areas where different species might graze together or share environments. Understanding potential cross-species jumps is always important.
Right. Okay, so let's try and sort of pull this all together for everyone listening.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about chronic wasting disease. It's this fatal infectious disease in deer, elk, moose, reindeer, caused by prions, not viruses or bacteria.
Right, those misfolded proteins.
No cure, always fatal when symptoms show. And it's incredibly challenging for wildlife managers because it spreads silently, and those prions can survive in the environment for a very, very long time.
Years, maybe decades, making containment really tough.
So the focus is on surveillance testing is key, and control measures like limiting animal movement, carcass disposal, sometimes population reduction, and public awareness. And while no humans have gotten it so far, the advice is definitely to avoid eating meat from infected animals because the potential risk isn't zero.
That sums it up well. It's a unique, persistent, and frankly worrying wildlife disease.
It really is. Okay, before we wrap up, we always like to end with a final thought, something to maybe mull over that builds on what we've discussed.
Okay. Well, considering what we've talked about, particularly the extraordinary resilience of these prions in the environment,
Yeah.
lasting for years, maybe decades, in soil and water.
Mm-hmm.
What long-term impact might CWD have on entire ecosystems beyond just the deer and elk populations? Think about scavengers, predators, soil health, plant uptake. How might this persistent contamination reshape those natural systems over the long haul? And what does that mean for future conservation strategies? It's something we're only beginning to grapple with.
Yeah, that's a really profound question. What are the ripple effects down the line? Something definitely for all of us to think about. Thank you for breaking all that down for us.
My pleasure.
And for you listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions. Thanks for diving deep with us today.